It started out like an ordinary weekend morning. The sun was out, kids were riding bikes in the neighborhood, and my wife was trimming flowers in our front yard. But in the middle of that calm, a group of strangers showed up, claiming to be from the HOA. They didn't have badges, no paperwork, and their tone was anything but professional. At first it seemed like some kind of mix-up, maybe even a bad joke, until one of them crossed a line no one should ever cross. My wife stood her ground, asking simple questions. But instead of answers, she got intimidation. That's when everything shifted. Now what they didn't know was who I was. Years in the Navy taught me discipline, patience, and what it really means to protect your own. I wasn't just a husband watching from the porch. I was trained to read situations, to see danger before it unfolded. But I stayed quiet, watching, waiting, as these so-called inspectors grew bolder. They thought they could scare a family, push us into silence, and walk away without consequence. In that moment, the air grew heavy, the neighborhood froze, and I realized this wasn't just about my wife anymore. It was about people abusing power, pretending to have authority they never earned. And when they made their final move, that's when everything changed. What happened next would not only expose who these fake HOA bullies really were, but also test just how far I'd go to protect my family. They called themselves the HOA, but everything about them felt off. Real HOA officials send letters, post notices, and follow clear rules. These men showed up in unmarked trucks, no clipboards, no official documents, just a handful of papers they waved around like props. My wife kept asking, "Can I see your identification? Can I call the office?" But they dodged every question. Instead, they pointed at our house, our garden, even the paint on the fence, insisting we were in violation of rules that didn't exist. Neighbors started peeking from their windows, whispering behind curtains. Some probably thought we had done something wrong, while others could sense the same thing I did. These weren't people enforcing rules. They were pretending to. Their voices grew louder, demanding fines on the spot, trying to scare us into handing over money. It was a scam, but a bold one, carried out in broad daylight. What made it even stranger was how organized they seemed. It wasn't random, it felt planned, as if they knew exactly which families to target. And for some reason, they picked us. Maybe it was because my wife was alone in the yard when they first pulled up. Maybe they thought we looked like an easy mark. They couldn't have been more wrong. I stood quietly by the doorway, every instinct from my Navy years telling me to observe before stepping in. They had no idea who they were dealing with, and the longer they pressed, the more dangerous this game became. The men kept circling the yard like they owned it, pointing at the mailbox, the driveway, even the kids' bicycles leaning against the fence. One of them muttered something about safety hazards, another warned of immediate penalties. Their tone wasn't official, it was threatening. My wife stayed calm, her voice steady, but I could see the worry in her eyes. She knew something was off. Still, she refused to back down, reminding them she'd lived here for years and had never once broken HOA rules. That only seemed to provoke them. One of the strangers leaned in closer, lowering his voice as if to intimidate her. "We can make this very expensive for you," he said. My fists clenched at my sides, but I held back. I needed to understand their angle. Was this just about money, or something deeper? Meanwhile, a few neighbors stepped onto their porches, watching but not daring to intervene. Some filmed quietly with their phones, unsure of what they were witnessing. That hesitation told me something important. Maybe these men had tried this before. Maybe other families had been shaken down and chose silence over confrontation. I scanned their trucks again. No plates from our state. That detail stuck with me. Were they moving from neighborhood to neighborhood, posing as fake HOA enforcers? If so, how many people had they already fooled? The tension thickened when one of them noticed me standing by the doorway. His eyes locked with mine, and in that split second, I knew the situation was about to escalate. The man's stare lingered, sharp and calculating, as if he finally realized I wasn't just another bystander. He nudged one of his partners, and suddenly their focus shifted from my wife to me. The easy arrogance they carried when they first arrived began to waver, replaced with suspicion. One of them asked, "And who are you supposed to be?" His tone was meant to test me, to measure if I was going to fold or fight. I stepped forward slowly, every movement deliberate. My wife's eyes met mine, a silent exchange passing between us. She knew I'd been holding back, waiting for the right moment. The men, however, mistook my calm for hesitation. They grew bolder, their voices louder, their threats sharper. They demanded money again, this time saying they'd report us and have our property seized. By now, more neighbors had gathered, their phones raised higher, recording every second. The so-called HOA enforcers noticed, but instead of backing down, they doubled down. One of them kicked at our garden bed, scattering flowers my wife had planted just days earlier. That was the spark. My patience was stretched thin, but I still held my ground. Inside, my instincts were firing, every sense heightened the way they had been during Navy missions. I could feel the tension coiling tighter, the moment before everything breaks loose. The men thought they were still in control, but I could see the cracks in their confidence. And as they stepped closer, crowding into our space, the stage was set for the confrontation no one could avoid. Just as the men crowded in closer, another truck rolled up to the curb. For a brief moment, I thought it might be backup from the real HOA, or maybe even the police someone had called. But when the door swung open, my suspicion deepened. Out stepped two more men, dressed the same way, carrying the same stack of phony papers. This wasn't random, was coordinated. My heart sank with a realization. This group wasn't just pretending to be HOA officials. They were running something bigger, and we had just been pulled into the center of it. The newcomers wasted no time. One pointed at the neighbors with phones and barked, "Put those cameras down unless you want a problem." That order didn't just silence the crowd, it shifted the entire energy. People froze, uncertain if this was just a scam anymore or something more dangerous. My wife moved a step closer to me, and I could feel her hand trembling as she brushed mine. Then came the real twist. One of the original men pulled out a folder, flipping through pages that listed names and addresses, neighbors, families, even ours. They weren't just making up rules. They had information, detailed and personal. Somehow, they knew who lived where, who might resist, and who might fold quickly. It was no longer about fake HOA fines. This was about control, about fear. And standing in that yard, I realized we weren't dealing with petty scammers. We were facing an organized operation, and they had already marked us as their target. The moment that folder opened, everything shifted. The crowd gasped as pages fluttered in the wind, names and addresses flashing like a hit list. That was all I needed to see. I stepped forward, planting myself between my wife and the men, my voice calm but firm. "This ends now." For the first time, their swagger faltered. They weren't facing a frightened homeowner anymore. They were facing someone who had spent years in the Navy, trained for pressure, trained to end threats. One of them tried to grab the folder back, but a neighbor finally found his courage. From across the street, he shouted, "I've already called the police." The phones that had been lowered shot back up, recording everything. The men glanced at each other, their confidence unraveling. Still, they made one last push, stepping closer as if intimidation could erase the truth, spilling out in front of everyone. That's when I moved, not with violence, but with precision. I ripped the folder from his hands and held it up high for the cameras. These are scams. These are lies. And now, everyone sees it. The neighborhood erupted, people shouting, closing in, no longer silent. The fake enforcers, realizing the tide had turned, scrambled back toward their trucks. Just when it seemed over, the final twist came. Among the scattered papers, one page bore an official seal, not fake, not forged. A real document tied to someone inside the actual HOA. The scam hadn't come from outside, it had roots deeper than anyone expected. When the police finally arrived, the trucks were already gone, but the evidence was in my hands. The folder stuffed with names, addresses, and that one page stamped with a real HOA seal told the whole story. It wasn't just a group of drifters pretending to enforce rules. Someone with inside knowledge had been feeding them information, giving them power to target the very people they were supposed to protect. Neighbors gathered around as officers sorted through the papers. Fear slowly gave way to anger. Families who had stayed silent admitted they'd been pressured to. Some even paid fines just to avoid trouble. What once looked like isolated encounters now revealed a larger scheme. The truth was no one had been safe, and our stand that day forced it into the light. For my wife and me, it became clear that protecting your home isn't just about fences and locks. It's about standing up when something feels wrong, even if you're standing alone. The Navy had taught me discipline, but family had taught me purpose. That's why I didn't move out of instinct that